I think for the moment, in the moment, a very profound injustice.
And then the theater manager came, Mr. McNeil, and he said, "You're not allowed to sit here." And she said, "I'm not disturbing anybody, I'm behaving properly." And he said, on the back of your ticket, he said, it says we can refuse to sell to disorderly people. And she said, "Well, you didn't refuse to sell to me. I have a ticket and I'm not disorderly, I'm sitting here." And he then turned on heel and called a white police officer, who came, and they forcibly, physically removed Viola Desmond in a way that she lost her shoe in the scuffle, lost her handbag, and she was bruised. She was physically manhandled by violent, assaultive white men. Description is always that she was very respectable, refined, gentle. That was one of the hallmarks of this case, is that she was so well put together. She was beautiful. Her hair was beautifully done. Her makeup was impeccable. She was well dressed, and she was very well spoken. And they carried her out to a patrol car, hauled her off to jail, and she spent the night in the town lockup. And so the juxtaposition of her behaving so well and these burly white men carting her off to jail is just so stark.
Confronted with a racist act, you can feel very alone, very marginalized. You know, there's a feeling in the pit of your stomach that you get when you're thrust into situations like that you never forget, that stays with you. No matter how many people gather around you as well, a lot of times you're standing there by yourself. You're the one that's the victim, you're the one that's or been victimized, and you're the one that has to endure it and deal with it. And so sometimes it can be a very lonely place to be standing when things like this happen. And you know, I'm sure that there's no question that Viola Desmond felt that way, at least, you know, going through what was happening at that time.
The other thing is that she sat in the jail. Apparently she pulled her white gloves on. She was quite frightened. She'd never been in jail before. And she sat bolt upright, she said, in the cell all night long. She was quite afraid. But she wanted again to make the point that she shouldn't be there. And even though she was in a lockup that included men as well as women, and must have been very disruptive overnight, she maintained her dignity and composure all night long.
She was not told by the magistrate that she could apply for bail. She was not told by the magistrate that she could get a lawyer and get some legal advice from a lawyer. She was not told by the magistrate that the trial could be adjourned until she consulted with a lawyer, and of course full disclosure at that time was unheard of. So the trial proceeded right away. And we're talking about 7 o'clock in the evening approximately when she was dragged out of the theater, and then at 9 o'clock the next morning she has her trial.
Exactly when this crime?
This is a private prosecution as opposed to a prosecution initiated by a police officer. The private prosecution is started by the manager of the Roseland Theatre. Essentially, she was charged with defrauding the province of Nova Scotia of 1 cent. It cost 40 cents for a downstairs ticket, it cost 30 cents for an upstairs ticket, and the difference in the tax was 3 cents and 2 cents. 3 cents attracted to the downstairs ticket and 2 cents attracted to the upstairs ticket. So she was essentially charged with defrauding the province of 1 cent.
She wasn't advised she had a right to a lawyer, and she didn't have one. She wasn't advised that she was allowed to produce her own evidence, make her own arguments, cross-examine the witnesses. She was just really swimming up river. She didn't really know what was going on.
I made my decision, and you've been found guilty of tax evasion.
The magistrate found her guilty of unlawfully entering the theater without paying the tax, the appropriate tax. He fined her $20 and $6 costs. And oddly enough, at that time, the cost, $6, went to the manager, the man who charged her in the private prosecution.
What's curious about all of this, to me, is that not a word was mentioned, not in the court case, and nowhere, at least in the public record, that this case was really about race. It wasn't about amusement tax. It wasn't about, the fact that she didn't have the right ticket. It was the fact that she was supposed to sit upstairs, and she refused.
So she collected her car, she went back to Halifax, and then she started to talk to people about what might be done. Her husband, Jack Desmond, who was the barber who ran the neighboring business to her beauty salon, was of the opinion that she should let it lie. Take it to the Lord with prayer, was his comment. He was a very religious man, and he thought that there was no point in raising a fuss. She also spoke, though, with Pearline Oliver and William Purley Oliver, who were the leaders of the church, the Baptist church that she belonged to. They were very, very important figures, again, in the African Canadian community of Halifax and of Canada at the time. They were real leaders. And they both thought that steps should be taken to object.
She consulted a doctor, and of course the doctor in turn advised her to consult a lawyer, and this is where the advancement of Colored People Association got behind her and got her a lawyer.
In 1945, a year earlier, Dr. Carrie Best had started the Clarion, which was a newspaper which was devoted to the issues and concerns of minorities and in particular African Nova Scotians within the province, raising the awareness about people, letting them know some of the injustices that were going on and things of that nature. And so Dr. Best and her son Calvert took up the fight and took up raising the awareness by running a front page story on Viola Desmond and exactly what had happened there at the Roseland Theatre.
It started this domino effect of other organizations hearing about it. It started the effect of the justice system doing something wrong, the police doing something wrong. It just started this whole chain of events.
I mean, imagine being somebody who's just a successful businesswoman one day, and the next day you're in the paper and you're talking about the fact that you defrauded the provincial government of 1 penny, when in fact really what you did was you went against the unjust laws that we had in place that segregated a movie hall in New Glasgow. That all of a sudden you had the judicial system down upon you, that you were arrested and thrown in jail overnight, for heavens, just to start out with that. But then that you were going to be thrown into something where, there were going to be organizations that were going to stand up to support you, but you're still the person that's standing there, and you're still the person that's the center of all that attention. It must have been a terrible place to have to be in as one individual, having to shoulder that fight.
We went to see a man named Mr. Bissett. He was a very good lawyer and thought to be respectable and gentlemanly, and they thought he would make the best case they could get. And he agreed to take the case. And he started out by bringing an action for compensation, financial compensation. He said that she was assaulted, that the prosecution was malicious, that there was really no right to reject her or bring this litigation against her. But he ran up against what he thought was a brick wall in those actions because she'd been convicted. So he decided it wasn't immediately, as is after further research, he made the decision that they needed to attack the original conviction and get it removed first before they could sue for damages. So then by that time, when he figured that out, it was too late to bring an appeal against the Theatres Act, which would have given them more scope to make arguments to reverse the conviction. There's a time limit on how long you have to appeal. It had run. And so he had to think of more creative ways. So he brought another action with the funny legal term of certiorari. It allows an upper-level court to review the actions of a lower court to see if they had jurisdiction to hear the case and to see if there had been any fundamental injustice done.
It goes to trial before a county court judge. He goes to county court, arguments, legal arguments. No warm body witnesses appear, but just legal arguments. And the judge said, no, she can't be successful because the number one consideration was she must be in custody when she makes the application. She was not in custody. So her appeal, so-called, is denied. And then her lawyer decides to appeal it to the Supreme Court of Nova Scotia with 4 judges sitting on it. So those 4 judges hear it. Their decisions varied and differed, but essentially the result was no. Viola Desmond cannot be successful because she was not in custody when the writ of certiorari was initiated. 2 of the judges remark about what was going on here, and what was going on here was a racially segregated movie theater that used a public statute to prevent blacks from sitting downstairs in the theater.
They had different reasons why they decided they would not reverse the conviction, but they all agreed in the end they wouldn't reverse the conviction. And so the conviction stood, and that was, I think, an indication that Canadian judges, and they were all white, Canadian judges were standing right behind a racially segregated policy in a theater, that they backed it. Our Canadian laws enforced it. Such a terrible loss in the courts. It shows us that our whole legal structure was backing racist events, behavior, and practices. It wasn't just a few bad people. This is the whole structure of the law and the courtrooms in our land that are giving power to the white theater owners, right? This is terrible stain on Canadian history.
We know Viola Desmond left Nova Scotia. It must have been a terrible place to have to be in as one individual, having to shoulder that fight. And again, not that she wasn't doing it by herself, because there were organizations that were trying to raise the attention, but again, the attention was all thrust on one lady. In her mind, what she wanted to do was go forward with what she was doing, which was build a business empire, and all of that got derailed as well. So even imagine coming to that realization that I'm going to have to give up everything that I'm doing here at home to go somewhere else because of all the limelight I've been thrust into because of this. It's a tragedy in itself right there.
You can't help but ask, what did the impact of that act on that day have on Viola Desmond's psychological outlook on life? As you all know, she left the province, not immediately after, but she eventually left. So you can't help but ask the question, what did we lose in terms of a valuable resource? Because she was an entrepreneur, she was somebody much ahead of her time in 1946. She had a beautician school, she had her own car. She, for all intents and purposes, was a thriving young woman. So that this break her spirit in some way, was this the catalyst that actually had her to leave this province? I don't know. For me, this is the impact that racism and discrimination has on people. And if your spirit is broken, then what do you have?